So worried that might be the case. No, maybe not. We're good. Okay. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll call the Missoula City Council meeting of October 2nd, 2017 to order. If you'd please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. And please let the record note that all council members are present this evening except Ms. Armstrong. We have minutes from the meeting of September 25th. Without objection, they'll be approved. Seeing none, we'll move on to our schedule of committee meetings. Ms. Rabine.
I'm going to pause us because I was visiting with council members up to the meeting and I have not even started our online recording, so hang on and bear with me.
Go ahead and talk among yourselves.
It hasn't even opened yet, much less to be able to start recording.
Got an ETA, Ms. Rabine?
Well, the network hasn't even opened the meeting yet, so we can go to the consent agenda, but none of this will be recorded in the software. I'll have to get a video from MCAT. Committees are being set for the coming 2 weeks, although committees will only meet this coming Wednesday. A reminder to everybody that next week, Monday, the City Council will not meet because it is an Indigenous Peoples Day here in Missoula. The Public Works Committee will meet Wednesday, the 4th of October from 9 until 11. Administration of Finance meets from 11 to 11:25. Land Use and Planning meets from 11:30 to 11:50. There's a second Land Use and Planning meeting from 1 o'clock to 1:50, and Public Works meets from 1:55 to 3:35.
Thank you, Ms. Rabine. Any changes to the committee schedule? Seeing none, we'll move on to the public comment portion of our agenda. This is your opportunity to comment on items not elsewhere on the agenda this evening. Mr. Grimm.
Doug Grimm, member of the Upper Rattlesnake Neighborhood Council leadership team, and I left everyone 2 of these in case you think this is important enough to pass one on to someone else that you know. And this is a map of people, for people who are coming out of the Rattlesnake into town on Duncan Drive and West Greeno Drive, which is at the top of it. And what prompted me to do this today was as I was driving into town at 11:15 this morning, I was going north on West Greeno Drive down the hill and headed for underneath the interstate where I had to stop because there were cars from underneath the interstate all the way to the Montana Rail Link tracks. And so I had to sit there and let the train proceed to the east. And then as soon as the train was done, the crossing arms went up. And of course we all started to move across the tracks. And I was probably 6 cars from the tracks and was astounded to see the crossing arms come down again. And I couldn't see because I'm behind quite a few cars, but I see there are 2 cars on the tracks and they are turning sideways and stuff, and I can't see, but they eventually got out of there before another locomotive came across the tracks headed east. Now, it could have stopped if necessary because it was only pulling 3 cars. But if it had been pulling an empty coal train or a freight train or something, they may not have been able to stop. Now, I have crossed that crossing, or have been driven across it for 71 years, and I see this problem occurring over and over again. Now, for you people in the audience, I'm not bringing a sign. This is the back end out of a coffin. But to you people up here, it's a map, okay? And if you look at the map that you have in front of you, you'll see a circle. That's a zone of death that I have enlarged here. And so, when people come south on West Greeno Drive, these blobs with arrows on them are automobiles. And the arrows indicate the direction they're turning. Now this is a white line across the pavement here. This is where cars stop, waiting for the tracks to be cleared. And as soon as the crossing arms go up, then you start moving forward. And people do not think to look to the west or to the east because the crossing arms have just come up. What you're intent on looking at is the back end of the car that's just a few feet ahead of you so that you don't bump into them. Okay, so you get to a certain point here, and there's one of the cars ahead of you decides to make a left turn and goes south onto Madison Street. Maybe it's a college student. And you see that you don't have enough room between the side of their car and the sidewalk to squeeze past them. There have been times when I have been in this position and I have put my front wheels up on the sidewalk, gunned it, and ran around this car to get on the Spruce Street. But when I saw 2 cars being trapped in this area here this morning, I thought maybe there should be a solution to this. And so that's problem number 1, cars coming south onto this area. You also have a problem with cars driving west on Spruce Street, which is down there. And they turn here and they cross the tracks, and doggone it, one of the people wants to turn left and go toward North 2nd Street. And so they stop right here, and that leaves the cars behind them. All of a sudden, they're perched on top of the tracks. Now, if you look at this little sheet that I prepared for you, you'll see in the upper or on the right-hand side, I suggest a cheap way out of getting into more traffic wrecks is to put this sign either on a post over here. This is the crossing signal with the blinking lights and the cross that says railroad crossing. I would suggest that a sign be put here and also over here, or else over here, so that when you start to cross, you'll see a sign on a post here that's big enough that you'll be able to realize, don't stop on the tracks, so you'll stop back here. And you may take a look to the west and to the east just for safety. Now,
We're a little over 5 minutes,
okay,
Mr. Grimm.
the other solution is to move this sidewalk over here. And then you have a left turn lane and a northbound lane. And another solution for over here is to move this sidewalk over here and put in a straight through lane and a left turn lane. But that's going to involve thousands of dollars. Now, if you look at this sheet here, up at the top it says Nicholas Bailey. I went out and talked to him today. He says he is not in a position to initiate putting a sign up because you people are in charge of that right of way. So he would suggest that you people, someone, get together with whatever committee or organization that you have and contact him, and here's his addresses and phone numbers, and see if this problem can be solved. Now, is there anyone here that would be willing to take this on?
So, Mr. Grimm, I've had conversations with Montana Rail Link, and I'll have another one tomorrow based on your testimony this evening.
Okay. And
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other general public comment this evening?
Jesse Ramos, Whitaker Drive, Missoula Citizen, Ward 4. So I've heard a lot of council members wonder out loud, sometimes very loud, why nobody thinks that they listen to the citizens. I would like to take a moment to answer that question tonight by just showing you guys a few statistics. So tonight I have in front of me 3,250 votes cast by the City Council between January 1st of this year and today. Do any of you want to take a quick guess as to how many of those votes were no votes? Just a shot in the dark. 20. You guys voted no 20 times out of 3,250 votes. In other words, you voted yes 99.4% of the time. Is that how checks and balances are supposed to work? How would you feel if Congress voted yes to the president's policies 99.4% of the time? I'm willing to make a large bet that you would all feel very uncomfortable with that, as you should. The council, like the Senate, is there to be a check on the president, or in this case, the mayor, not a rubber stamp. Heck, I'm willing to bet that even a rubber stamp machine would malfunction and vote yes more times than, or vote no more times than you guys, more times than 0.6% of the time. Rubber stamping is not what the City Council is for. If it was, then you would all be appointed by the mayor, not elected by the citizens. So it just so happens that 25% of the 20 no votes cast this year were regarding the cemetery issue. And I want to thank all 5 of the council men and women who had the courage to fight for the businesses that they were elected to represent. However, this does bring me to my next point. Mr. Mayor, do you realize that when you voted to approve that resolution, when you broke the tie, you took away a significant amount of business from the small business owners here in Missoula that you were elected to represent? Just like that, you had a devastating effect on their businesses with one arrogant vote. Does that bother you at all? I ask you, Mr. Mayor, who do you serve? Do you serve the citizens of Missoula? Do you serve the small businesses? Or do you serve merely to represent the enormous city government that you've created? And to finalize, I ask the members of the City Council, who do you represent? Do you represent the mayor, or do you represent and serve the citizens that you were elected to? Because 0.6% really makes me wonder. Several members of this council have not only accused me of campaigning, but have also accused me of being misinformed and misleading the public. 2 charges that I take very seriously. And I challenge you all to answer these questions and point out how myself and my fellow citizens are wrong in assuming that we no longer have a voice. So I ask you in closing, what other businesses need to worry about the government that they are supposed to be represented by taking over and have a negative, sometimes devastating impact on their business?
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Any other general public comment this evening?
Candy Matthew Jenkins. I have to say, bravo, Jesse. Bravo. I'm reading from the Soviet Art of Brainwashing. Psychopolitics, the art of mental healing. I believe this is a curse of our age with so many people on drugs. And this was read into the public record on un-American activities between the years of 1936 and 1939. There is a curve of degradation that leads downward to a point where the endurance of an individual is almost at an end, and any sudden action toward him will place him in a state of shock. Similarly, a soldier held prisoner can be abused, denied, defamed, and degraded until the slightest motion on the part of his captors will cause him to flinch. Similarly, the slightest word on the part of his captors will cause him to obey and or vary his loyalties and beliefs. Given sufficient degradation, a prisoner can be caused to murder his fellow countrymen in the same stockade. Experiments on German prisoners have lately demonstrated that after 70 days of filthy food, little sleep, nearly untenable quarters, and the least motion toward the prisoner will bring about a state of shock beyond his endurance threshold and will cause him to receive hypnotically anything said to him. Thus, it is possible in an entire stockade of prisoners numbering into the thousands to bring about the state of complete servile obedience, and without having to personally address each one, to pervert their loyalties and implant in them adequate commands to ensure their future conduct, even after their release of their own people.
Any other general public comment this evening? Yes, sir.
Mayor Engen and members of the council, my name is David Beck. I live at 214 Hastings between Bonner Park and Paxson School here in Missoula. I would like to request that the Missoula City Council not to support the Festival of the Dead in any way and to consider a resolution renouncing it. I have never participated in the Festival of the Dead activities in Missoula, although I have lived here for 17 years. To me, the event smacks of cultural appropriation, the practice of taking pieces of other people's cultural activities, in this case religious activities, and using them for your own purposes. To me, the month-long celebration, which culminates in a parade, is a direct ripoff of Day of the Dead, an event grounded in indigenous religious practices in southern and central Mexico. Yesterday, I attended one of their events for the first time to stand in support of Indigenous people who were there to protest it. Their motto was, the protesters' motto was, "This is not okay." We had been told by some of the organizers that the month-long activities in the parade were not modeled on the Day of the Dead, but nearly every person who spoke at their event referred to it as a Day of the Dead celebration. The attendees were very hostile to the Indigenous protesters, mocking Indigenous rituals and getting right in the protesters' faces to yell at them. They did not yell at us white folks who were there with them. I was shocked at the vitriol, the blatant racist actions, and the disregard for Indigenous belief systems from members of the group. I also believe that it is inappropriate for them to co-opt Native religious ceremonial activities and remake them into something of their own. I know they have the right to do it, but it is not the right thing to do. I do not believe that members of the organization act in ways that reflect the values of inclusivity that is the Missoula that I want to live in. So again, I urge the City Council not to support this and in fact to renounce it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Anyone else this evening? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, mine aren't going to be probably quite as eloquent. Oki nisuni taniku ikutsi miskimaki Beck. Hi, my name's Iku Beck. I grew up in Missoula. I went to Paxson, I went to Washington, I went to Hellgate, and then I went to Harvard. And when I was there, I hadn't attended the Festival of the Dead ever before, but when I was there, I learned a lot more about why it was wrong. And when I came back, I realized that it was still happening. And I don't know, it just really emotionally impacts me personally, seeing my family go out and protest and seeing white men like come vitriolic directly at like the Indigenous people. Like I know that I look white, so they weren't coming at me, but they were coming at like Native people. We were standing behind a sign, right? So there's the whole entire like parade and festival itself that's a problem, but then there's also the reaction to people who are just standing behind a sign, and that was like people coming up in, you know, the Indigenous people's faces and yelling at them. And I think that that is a bad thing, you know, that's racism, and so is the festival. And I think that the fact that once Indigenous people step into the room, it becomes a racist situation, that is not a festival for the entire community. Because yeah, it's not welcoming to Indigenous people, clearly. So I would like, I don't know if the City Council is in charge of this, but if you guys could not have the parade happen, or like not let the permit happen, I would really appreciate that. I think that a lot of people in my generation, we grew up thinking that this was just a regular thing. Like, this is part of the community. This is one of the community's activities. So I was socialized, you know, I'm 22 years old. I was socialized with this 25-year-long festival to think that this appropriation was okay. And then I realized how wrong it was. And if we don't stop this, then there are going to be generations just like me who are going to grow up thinking that this appropriation is okay, and that the behavior that those people like exhibited towards Indigenous people is okay. And that really worries me, because I think that our next generation should be better than this generation, and hopefully less racist, because I think that Missoula has a really unique community that could have a really cool festival that honors the dead, that is not one that is from Indigenous roots and doesn't like colonize other people's religions. There's my word vomit. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you, Ms. Beck. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Kim Spurzum. I live at 1612 South 2nd Street West. And so I'm just here also in support of the Becks and the Lapeers and other folks that were protesting last night. Last night was really shocking to me. I just showed up really to an alliance with mentors, teachers, educators, and people that I really value. And while I was there for an hour and a half, I watched white community members lunge out, lash out, grab the clothing of people who were just standing peacefully, push, try to take their belongings, verbally assault children and their mothers in front of other folks, and no one stepped. The entire group that was there just closely moved in to one another and didn't turn to condemn the violence that was happening to these folks. And so I would just ask you on Indigenous Peoples Day, which you have created and are going to honor next Monday, to speak out against the racism that's happening in our community and to speak out in favor of these folks that are working really hard to create a more inclusive community.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else this evening? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is, excuse me, my name is Rosalind Lapierre, and I live at 214 Hastings, Missoula, and I am also asking the City Council to address the issue of the Missoula Festival of the Dead. I know that you do have to give permits for any kind of parade or using the public space, and so that's one way that you can address some of the issues that have already been brought to you. But I also want to mention something that is a little longer, which is this time of the year is a time that for most Native people in Montana is kind of one of the worst times of the year, because we go from during the month of October, next week is usually Columbus Day. We go from Columbus Day to Halloween to Day of the Dead to Thanksgiving, and throughout that entire time period, which is kind of a 2-month time period, there's this ongoing onslaught of people who are either dressing up like Native Americans, playing Native Americans, people always in costume, either in our school systems or in our public spaces. Festival of the Dead is one of those spaces where throughout the entire month of October leading up to November 2nd, we have this constant we have this constant costuming of our own community members who are going into what a lot of people would say kind of almost like blackface, except in our case it's the white face of the skull makeup that people wear that is part of Festival of the Dead. We saw it last night when an entire family showed up with all of their young children completely costumed with face paint. And this is, as has already been stated, the Festival of the Dead, as it is originally celebrated in Central America and in Mexico, is actually an indigenous religious ritual. It is not secular. It's not something that people did for fun or for partying, but what we have turned it into here in the city of Missoula is that it's just a big party, and it's a time where people can dress up and pretend like they're Indians. And that's something that everybody has already spoke to, that this issue of appropriation, of the blatant racism, and as has already mentioned last night, when we went to very peacefully protest and we were all standing behind a banner, that people were lunging at us. I had one gentleman who came within about 4 inches of my nose, screaming at me and asking me pretty much asking me what I was doing there, kind of invading their space. It was a public space in the city of Missoula. It's not their space. It is our space. And so this is something that really does need to be addressed, I think, by a city council, and hopefully there are methods that it can be addressed, either through taking away people's permits, not allowing permits to occur, or doing some other process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Anyone else this evening? All right, with that, we will move on to our consent agenda. Items on that agenda were approved unanimously in City Council standing committees, and we save a little time on Monday evenings by considering these items all at once. Ms. Rabine will read the list of consent agenda items aloud so those in the audience and those at home will know what we're considering, and we'll take comment on these items before we vote. Ms. Rabine.
I have 4 items on tonight's consent agenda. The first is to approve claims, which are the city's accounts payable totaling $2,243,102.29 for checks that are dated tomorrow, October 3rd, 2017. Number 2 is to ratify claims in the amount of $792,134.67 for checks that were dated August 2nd of 2016. Number 3 is to approve revisions to the Captain John Mullen Neighborhood Council bylaws, which were approved at the Neighborhood Council's September 26, 2017 meeting. And finally, to approve the final plat for the for the Rattlesnake Hills Estates Plan Unit Development Subdivision, phases 5 and 6.
Thank you, Ms. Rabine. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Anyone in the audience care to comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
On the consent agenda, items 1 through 4, Bentley votes yes. Cares votes yes. Dabari votes yes. Heddle votes yes. Hess votes yes. Jones votes yes. Marlar votes yes. Swaney votes yes. Von Lossberg votes yes. West votes yes. And Wilkins votes yes. Would any of you like to change your vote? That is 11 ayes and 1 absent.
And the consent agenda is approved. We'll move on to comments from city staff, agencies, boards, commissions, authorities, and the community forum. And we have a number of reports this evening, beginning with the Captain John Mullen Neighborhood Council report. Mr. Joe.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anthony Joe, member of the Captain John Mullen leadership team. We had our general meeting last Tuesday, September 26th at Hellgate Elementary, 6 to 7 p.m. We had about 20 people in attendance, and at that meeting we held a vote to approve the new bylaws that was just approved by City Council a few minutes ago. It was approved unanimously, and really the reason why we did that is because the last time it was modified was back in March of 2008. We added non-discrimination clause and a guide of conduct for the participants in the meeting. We also held an election of leadership team members. 4 members were voted in for a 2-year term. Anthony Joe, that's me, Leanna Waller, Jane Cook, and Desiree Bennett. So with Steve Schmidt, who is a current member, we now have 5 members in our leadership team, more than ever. So hopefully we can do more things in the future. And after our meeting, we were followed directly with the candidates forum for Ward 1 and 2. That concludes my meeting.
Thank you, sir. And we have a community forum report this evening from Mr. Giordano.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Bob Giordano. I'm on the leadership team of the Lower Rattlesnake Neighborhood Council, and last Thursday I moderated the community forum. There's, as you know, it rotates among the neighborhood councils. I'll be pretty brief here. We had 3 presentations. The first was Michelle Hastings. She's the director at the Senior Center, the Missoula Senior Center. One, she wanted to dispel any notion that they're in trouble or selling their building, anything like that. On the contrary, they're doing pretty well, but they do need community support, financial support to keep the building going strong, and also volunteers. And it doesn't have to be a senior, it could be anyone, it could be you all. Volunteering at various events or even in their thrift store. So it's, after hearing her presentation and knowing a little bit about the Senior Center, it seems like it's an important community asset. And it's not just for our elders, it's for everyone. The second presentation was Heidi Kendall. She is the suicide prevention specialist with the Missoula County Health Department. And Montana is doing worse than other states. We have a higher suicide rate than most. And that's Heidi's job, is to address that and turn that around. And they have some programs that they can take to other community groups. They can really take them anywhere. It's how to talk to people who might be contemplating suicide. It's how to really be a listener and turn that statistic around. So I'd encourage people, if they have time, to be involved and contact Ms. Kendall at the health department. The final presentation was Mike Haynes, Director of Development Services, and he just went into detail about the 3 positions that they have taken on in development services in response to all the growth that's going on in Missoula. That was the 3 presentations. I'm not going to give an update on all the different neighborhood councils. You get that individually. There was one neighborhood council that insisted that I come and give you all thanks, and that's the Miller Creek Neighborhood Council, and they wanted to thank you for making the exemption to the complete streets policy and your vote recently about taking away a bike lane and putting in parking. So they're pretty appreciative for that and that you listened to their neighborhood. That will conclude the community forum report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giordano. And last but not least, all the way from the Rose Park neighborhood, Chief Painter.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councilors. I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to report on our neighborhood general meeting and our neighborhood activities. Most of this brief report will consist in us giving thanks, which works out well because that's a huge part of my personal creed. Plus, I don't think you folks hear that nearly enough. We held a general meeting at Rose Park, which was conveniently named, last Wednesday, and had nigh on 60-some of our neighbors join us for ice cream and to chat about the hood. We met quite a few new neighbors, which is always encouraging and educational. And while we are, of course, as endearing as they come, I also think having the Big Dipper ice cream truck there didn't hurt one bit. So I'd start off our thanks by offering appreciation to Brian and the other ice cream icons at Big Dipper. We'd also like to thank Parks and Recreation for granting us a permit for use of the parks, Jack Hines and the Missoula Water Sector Division Drainage for bringing us the water truck. Ethan Smith, your Missoula PD's Community Hugfest officer, though that may not be his official title, came to introduce himself and talk about our efforts to look out for each other and to assist Missoula PD in their work. And Jordan Lyons, ASUM's Renter Center Director, who coordinates UM's Neighborhood Ambassador Program, also attended and talked about their program and how they might facilitate better relations with UM students in the neighborhood. At our request and invitation, we also received reports from MCPS on the status of the construction projects at the 2 MCPS facilities in Rose Park. Willard, as you know, it recently broke ground on their new school, and Washington, where the contractor is preparing to start construction on their new gymnasium. We also reported on our work with St. Joseph School to address some ongoing problems with inappropriate use of their grounds, due in large part to the tireless work of Gwen Jones over the last 5 years with the assistance of MCPS's administration and some of you folks. The grounds are now open for neighborhood use with some restrictions, including closing the grounds from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. and not allowing dogs. The entrances now are all signed, and we are asking our neighbors and any other users of the playgrounds and grounds to please report anyone on the grounds after hours or other inappropriate activity. We held elections for our leadership team, and I'm very happy to report that we have a full slate of leadership team reps for the first time since Lewis and Clark came through, probably. So thanks to Julie Devlin and Tate Jones, who agreed to serve another term on the LT, and special thanks to Margaret Molino for contributing her wisdom and wit to our leadership team for the last couple of years. We also welcome 5 new Rose Park residents as members of the leadership team: Elizabeth Williams, Rula Agnay, Katie LaPointe, Leah Old, and Kathleen Gamor. We appreciate their interest and investment in our neighborhood community. I'd like to close by recognizing the work of Jane Kelly and Karen Gazvoda with the City's Office of Neighborhoods. They are, as I'm sure you're aware, sort of victims of their own success, as so many neighborhood councils, as Anthony alluded to, are more active today than I think ever before. Jane, as is her custom, talked at our general meeting about the history and purpose of the neighborhood councils, and even though I've heard that origin story quite a few times, hearing it always makes me very happy and thankful to be living in a place that makes such an effort to engage its citizens. Engaged citizenry, as you know better than most, is hard work. But the neighborhood councils are a formal effort to invite our neighbors to invest their time and heart in working with this body and the city's administration to make this place better. That's an honorable calling. So thanks to you all, and to Jane, and to all of our neighbors involved in their neighborhood councils. Every morning when I get up, it seems as if there's always plenty of bad news to be had. Sometimes I think finding good news takes a little looking, or as a good friend of mine recently wrote, it takes a little balancing. So thanks to you all for that work. I also would like to mention that, as Bob mentioned, your Senior Citizen Center is having a fundraiser next door, should you care to contribute by 20% of your tab by wandering next door after your meeting. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Painter. With that, we will move on to the public hearing portion of our agenda. State law and our own council rules set guidelines for inviting comment in a formal way on a variety of issues, and following the staff report, the City Council and I will invite comment. Council typically votes on the same evening as a public hearing, unless one council member elects to return that item to committee for further consideration. Our lone public hearing this evening is on an ordinance to amend chapters 20.75 signs and 20.100 terminology in the Title 20 City Zoning Code. And our staff report this evening comes from Ms. Gress.
So yes, good evening. For the record, I am Jen Gress of Development Services. And tonight's discussion is indeed a hearing to review science and technology chapters of Title 20. I'll be giving you an overview of the process, provide some background, summary of changes, review of the proposed amendments. I'll let you know about comments we received from the public as well as the planning board. And then we'll be asking you to approve make a motion to approve the ordinance for this evening. So the draft that you should be referencing is dated September 5th. So the process to amend the terminology and signs chapter included a presentation to LUP in June. We requested and received comments from agencies and the public in July. Planning board held a public hearing on August 15th. We attended the planning board, the LUP a second time on August 30th. Legal ads were placed in the Missoulian for both the planning board hearing and tonight's hearing, and information was placed on the city's website. So Development Services staff has reviewed Missoula sign regulations and is proposing amendments that will put the sign code in compliance with the U.S. Supreme Court decision regarding content neutrality. Research included reviewing available interpretations of the Reed case done by different attorney organizations and sign companies, as well as consulting with the City Attorney's Office and Development Services staff. The intent is to modify the sign code to comply with the court's decision while minimizing policy changes, and a majority of the proposed amendments apply to temporary signs and do not affect the basic commercial sign allowances. This is also the first time the sign ordinance has been looked at in many years and in its entirety, so proposed amendments also include updating the chapter to be consistent with other municipal codes, updating the terminology chapter to support the signs chapter, as well as some staff suggested amendments. Proposed amendments are subject to and comply with the review criteria in Title 20 under Section 2085-040G, zoning amendments and review criteria. So before I start with the specific amendments, I want to give you a little bit of background about the Reed case and what it does, and summarize some of the amendments that are occurring. So in June of 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed a sign issue commonly known today as the Reed case. And the Reed case was brought by Clyde Reed, who is the pastor of Good News Community Church, against the town of Gilbert, Arizona, regarding a temporary sign that they used to advertise the various locations of their meetings. So the town cited the church with exceeding the sign time limits for displaying its temporary signs, as well as a failure to include the date of the event on those signs. So the church eventually filed suit with the district court, claiming the sign code violated their freedom of speech. The case eventually ended up with the U.S. Supreme Court, which found in favor of the church and said that Gilbert's sign code was content-based and did violate the First and 14th Amendments. Bottom line is that cities across the country now must be what's called content neutral. They cannot take into account the content of the sign itself, such as being garage sale, real estate contractors, special events, credit cards, or other types of similar information. Signs can be regulated on site activity or zoning regulations. Physical attributes such as size, location, number, lighting, materials used, and time. So again, content neutral regulations do not rely on what the sign says to apply regulations, but rather regulate based on physical attributes. Temporary signs are most affected by the Reed case ruling and are found in sections 2075-030, 040, and each zoning district sign table. The intent was to maintain as closely as possible the signage allowances currently permitted. So you'll see as we go through here, some size limits have been expanded, some have been reduced, with the combining of those signs that are currently individually regulated. Proposed amendments created specifically to address the Reed case include additional purpose statements, removing language specific to what signs say, such as garage sale, grand opening, hours of operation, adding a new line in each zoning district table called temporary signs, as well as the criteria for those signs, and amending the terminology chapter to remove language to what a sign says, as well as removing those signs like menu board and nameplate. So generally what that kind of equates to on the ground, what you might see is the amendments eliminate the exception to use wind signs and temporary changeable copy signs for grand openings and businesses under new ownership, because we can no longer specifically call out those uses. And then the limit, a limit of height on temporary signs to 8 feet, where previously there was no height limit. Staff recommended amendments. Clarify the purpose statements, being explicit about how we address banners, streamlining and removing non-essential language in the prohibited signs section, reordering lists of signs in the signs allowed without a permit, expanding the size of ground signs in residential districts, clarifying the roles of flags as signs, eliminating the height of wall signs in non-residential districts, moving language into more appropriate sections, including newly created zoning districts that we adopted a while ago, making the central business district more consistent with other districts, clarifying current practices for signs that are called above canopy and marquee, providing appropriate cross-referencing, removing duplicate words, clarifying violation penalties for billboards, and updating the terminology section again. So some of these changes, what you might see on the ground, the amendments specify that banners will be permitted 3 times a year for 2 weeks at a time with a permit, where previously they were permitted to be used only during grand openings and new ownership events with a permit. Wind signs will continue to be prohibited. The central business district had a cumulative 200 square foot requirement that's been removed, and then the size of signs adjacent to residential districts will be reduced, making the central business district consistent with other commercial districts. Flags have been defined and are required to be placed 20 feet from the property line with a limit of 3 poles, where currently they're permitted closer to the right-of-way. Amendments proposed to be consistent with other municipal codes. That includes increasing a sign's clearance from the ground and amending the minimum height for when a building permit is required. Changes made in response to comments received, amend the regulations to allow a second sidewalk sign in the business improvement district to be retained, clarify how wayfinding signs are addressed, and removing string lights from the prohibited section. So again, what you'll see on the ground more with this is, again, that second sidewalk sign being allowed for each business in the bid on a permanent basis, and then allowing string lights for any application. So into the amendments themselves. So I'm going to highlight these amendments, beginning with the purpose section. Proposed amendments reinforce the purpose statements and include clarifying that the regulations are intended to help reduce distractions, obstructions, and hazards for pedestrians and vehicles, and to ensure that free speech is protected. Amendments to the general sign regulations include clarifying placement of signs, changing the vertical clearance of signs over sidewalks to 9 feet, creating consistency with engineering regulations, and updating the regulations to require a building permit for signs over 7 feet, creating consistency with building regulations. A statement was added noting where temporary signs can be placed, and an amendment was added coordinating wayfinding signage with the rest of the ordinance. The prohibited signs and sign characteristics section has been reorganized and clarified. Temporary signs that are currently prohibited will continue to be prohibited. The section is being streamlined. The list is being simplified. Other sections are being combined, and at the recommendation of the planning board, exposed light bulbs are being removed. Information regarding dynamic display signs was moved to section 070, which is regulations of specific types of signs, and the language for vehicle signs has been clarified and content-based terms have been removed. The last amendment slide for prohibited signs and sign characteristics removes temporary changeable copy signs and wind signs due concerns over content-based terms, removes duplicate language, and section J has been clarified by adding more examples of what a moving sign is. It also exempts the national and governmental flags, and then banners, just as a note, are being addressed in a different section. So the next section is signs allowed without a permit. Amendments here include making the section content neutral, addressing the Reed case, reordering the listed signs so long-term signs are listed together, and including new language in subsection H pertaining to flags. Subsection I contains the majority of temporary sign amendments, and this section was reorganized and again made content neutral to comply with Reed. You can see we've struck the references to specific names of temporary signs and replaced them with new general requirements, which are included in the next slide, and include clarifying language for temporary signs in the terminology chapter. The last slide in signs allowed without a permit shows mostly regulations that have been moved into the long-term category, leaving seasonal signs and holiday decorations as temporary. New language for temporary signs allowed in each zoning district was included, and then new subsection 5 addressing temporary window signs was moved from section 070 because they're temporary. The next section is residential and open space public districts. Amendments to section 050 include language allowing temporary signs for residential uses. This slide shows proposed amendments to include temporary signs in residential and open space public districts, as well as proposed increase in the size of an allowed ground sign in residential uses, because 8 feet doesn't seem to meet the needs of most people who want a ground sign, as evident through most of the variance requests that we've been getting. This slide shows you how temporary signs are treated currently and how they would be regulated with the proposed amendments. So the red is new. The amendments to temporary signs include limiting them to 8 feet, combining most of the temporary signs into one category called temporary signs to meet Reed clarifications, and to clarify the definition of temporary signs. So under banners there, I wanted to point that out specifically. Currently banners are in residential areas are limited to special events for 2 weeks, twice a year, and they have to obtain a sign permit. What's proposed is to remove the language for special events. We're going to limit banners to 32 square feet, 1 per each frontage, allowed for a duration of 2 weeks, 3 times a year, and it's still going to require a permit. Signs in non-residential districts. Proposed amendments to section 2075060 include adding the newly created B3 district and allowing and language allowing residential uses to use temporary signs. In non-residential B districts, the maximum wall height was removed, allowing wall signs to be placed anywhere on the building facade due to the number, again, of requested variances that have been approved. A new category for temporary signs is included, allowing them, again, up to 32 square feet, a maximum height of 8 feet. And then the footnotes in that section have been appropriately amended. This amendment streamlines the language for commercial and industrial districts with no content change. The proposal removes the maximum wall height in other non-residential districts as well. Includes a new category again for temporary signs, allowing them again at 32 square feet with a maximum height of 8 feet, and appropriately will amend the footnotes. Changes to the central business district includes removing the limitation of 200 square foot cumulative signage, and then requires that signs within 100 feet of a residential zoning district comply with the B zone sign requirements. And this has an effect of reducing and limiting the number of signs adjacent to those residential zoning districts, making the regulations consistent with other sections of the sign code. Proposed amendments remove the maximum wall height in the central business district like other non-residential districts. Includes temporary signs, again, at a maximum of 32 square feet and 8 feet tall, and amends the footnotes. As in the residential areas, the commercial temporary signs are being treated the same. In non-residential districts, banners are currently permitted for grand openings for 2 weeks. And they're also allowed for events, special events for 2 weeks, twice a year. Both those situations require a permit. The proposed amendments are going to remove the language for grand opening and special events, will limit the banners to 32 square feet, allowing them 1 per frontage wall, will permit them for 2 weeks, 3 times a year, and still require a sign permit. So amendments to specific types of signs, which is 070. That includes clarifications, making language content neutral, and removal of outdated language. Subsection B has been split into hanging signs and above canopy marquee signs, clarifying what current practices are. A second amendment creates consistency with the engineering regulations by increasing the lowest point of a hanging sign to 9 feet. Temporary window signs were moved into section 2075-040, which is signs allowed without a sign permit because they're temporary. Directory signs are now called multi-tenant signs to be content neutral and agree with Reed. The language regarding dynamic display signs is moved from prohibited signs and sign characteristics to regulations of specific types of signs because dynamic display signs are prohibited in specific locations, districts. Proposed amendments regarding service stations made this section content neutral and compliant with the Reed case again by deleting the reference to the fuel, and an additional amendment was required to ingress and egress locations that they only show static images, and this will help minimize distractions at these locations. Wayfinding signage has been put in place in the business improvement district, and the exception to have 2 sidewalk signs in the bid was proposed to be removed. However, Planning Board proposed the amendment shown here and to retain the second sidewalk sign option. Proposed amendments regarding menu board signs make the section content neutral to comply with the Reed case. And subsection L, banners for special events, has been replaced with specific regulations for all banners. Proposed changes to signs for businesses that lack street frontage include cross-referencing temporary window signs, removing non-relevant language, and making language content neutral, again, to comply with Reed. Section 2075-09A was clarified by adding the word ground, and section 2075-130 was clarified by removing the word only. Proposed amendments clarify language in the enforcement adjacent to highways portion of the billboard section and make it clear that violations are punishable only by fine. So that's for signs, so on to terminology. Amendments in the terminology chapter support the changes that are being proposed in the signs chapter. So again, this slide doesn't show the red, so what I want to point out for you is the changes that are happening. The words that may be freestanding or attached to a building are new. The words freestanding canopy are new, and the words attached canopy are new. So those are the amendments to the terminology for canopy, and these are added for clarity. Language is included in the definition of sign to be consistent with other sections of the sign regulations. The definition of abandoned sign was clarified, and the definition of address was removed because the term is no longer used in the ordinance since it doesn't comply with the Reed case. The definition of banner has been clarified. Directional signs have now become minor signs, and directory signs are now considered multi-tenant signs, making each neutral, content neutral, and complying with Reed. The definition for hanging sign has been clarified. Ideological signs have been added to the list and include political signs to comply with the Reed case, and incidental signs have been made content neutral and amended to state that they can only, that they cannot be freestanding. We added a definition for inflatable signs, and menu boards are now stacking lane signs, making them content neutral to comply with Reed. A definition of minor signs has been added, as well as a definition for multi-tenant sign to replace directory sign, again, to comply with Reed. The definition of nameplate has been removed because it does not comply with Reed. Whole sign was amended to make it consistent with other formats, format of other definitions, Political signs are noted as being part of ideological signs. The definition of real estate sign has been removed because it is not content neutral and does not comply with Reed, and real estate signs will be addressed through each zoning district as a temporary sign. Stacking lane signs were previously called menu boards and now comply with Reed. The definition of temporary sign has been updated to be more clear, and the definition for under canopy or under marquee sign is removed because we combine that language with hanging signs. We included a definition of vehicle. Wind sign was expanded to include more examples and to include national and governmental subdivision flags as noted in section 2075040G. So on to comments. Comments that we received regarding the proposed amendments included the Parks Department with a concern about permitting approved wayfinding signs. The Business Improvement District and Missoula Downtown Association were both in favor of proposed amendments to eliminate that second sidewalk sign in the Business Improvement District. However, Lake Missoula Tea Company commented that the wayfinding system doesn't fit their needs and that they would like to keep their second sign. And then again, Planning Board recommended the language be retained and amended it to remove the connection of sidewalk signs to wayfinding signs, and effectively allowing that second sidewalk sign in the bid on a permanent basis. High Noon Petroleum expressed concern regarding signs on the top of canopies, digital pricing, incidental signs, and the visibility of wayfinding signage. DVG Architect and Planning provided comment that they may be helpful. It may be helpful to include an illustration with the definition of vehicle sign. And then the City of Missoula's Housing and Community Development Office had no comment. Further comments were received from both Missoula Building Industry Association and the Missoula Organization of Realtors, who both had concern regarding the limitations placed on temporary signs in each district. And then again, as noted earlier, Lake Missoula Tea Company expressed concern over losing their second sidewalk sign in the bid. Pointing out again specifically, Planning Board amendments, they had their public hearing August 15th, recommended approval of the proposed amendments with 2 changes, and each of these was noted earlier, but I wanted to bring them to your attention again. The first is to remove string lights from the prohibited signs and sign characteristics section. The second amended the sidewalk sign section, again to permanently allow that second sidewalk sign in the Business Improvement District. And that concludes my presentation, as long as it is. Staff recommends City Council approve an ordinance amending the signs and terminology chapters of Title 20 as recommended by Planning Board. And again, that concludes my presentation. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Gress. With that, I will open the public hearing. Does anyone care to comment on the amendments to the ordinance? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions from council members? Mr. Wilkins?
So I was just curious, how did you answer High Noon Petroleum and some of the other ones that objected? Is there a compromise or a different way to do that? Or?
I did talk to Mr. Earl Allen of High Noon, and a lot of the concerns that he had were misunderstandings of what the readings of the regulation was. One thing, at the very beginning, we had suggested that we combine directional signs and incidental signs into one category called minor signs. One of his concerns was that incidental signs were currently defined as being credit cards, hours of operation, those kinds of things. And if we combine those two, their credit card signs, which they have on every pump, would have been limited. So after having that conversation with him and thinking about what we'd done, we actually made an amendment quite a while ago to address his concern.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Karras?
Thanks for answering my email with a couple questions after the committee report. I just wanted to talk a bit more about the example around special event banners. The example that I provided in my email was the two different Albertsons who recently had a grand opening, didn't get sign permits for their grand opening signage, and then were found to be out of compliance and told to take their signs down. You had emailed me kind of explaining what they needed to have done to participate in that correctly. And my question is, do you know like how they could have known that? Should their contractors have told them, or should the ownership have looked into the banners? It just doesn't seem intuitive to me that folks would think to go looking for this.
I think it's a combination of both things. Being as a business owner, that you may want to check on those. They know that they are required to get a sign permit to put up a sign. As a business owner, you might want to check into that. And it's a personal opinion, I must admit, sign companies really should know these regulations as well and be able to advise their patrons.
Sure. Thanks for commenting.
Further questions? Seeing none, Mr. DeBari.
Yes. I move that council adopt the City of Missoula ordinance amending Chapter 20.75 entitled Signs and Chapter 20.100 entitled Terminology of Title 20 Missoula Municipal Code, the city zoning ordinance. Amendments are being proposed to bring the chapters into compliance with the U.S. Supreme Court decision Reed versus Town of Gilbert, Arizona, to bring them into compliance with other municipal codes and address staff suggested amendments. And may I speak to that?
Mr. DeBari.
I just wanted to thank Jen and other staff at Development Services for a high level of attention to detail. I appreciate the effort that you put into going through all of this and revising our ordinance to meet the recent Supreme Court decision, but also to think more holistically about things that could be done to adjust the sign ordinance and to be responsive to the comments that you received. And I will be supporting the ordinance.
And with that, we have a motion that's in order. Is there discussion on the motion? Ms. Karras?
I'll be supporting the motion also. I feel like I've heard that, like, in passing for the past couple of years, that some people think we have a more restrictive than necessary sign ordinance. But I want to call out the fact that every person that contacted the city during this process seemed to have their concerns addressed in a logical manner, and I really appreciate that. And the public process is cumbersome sometimes and difficult if you don't know it exists to participate in it. But I do feel like those who reached out were heard, and I think that's really important. And obviously we have to be in compliance with Supreme Court rulings, and so I'll be voting yes.
Further discussion? Mr. Von Lossberg.
Thanks. I'll be supporting the motion as well. I wanted to thank Jen for her work, and I just wanted to note, as one of the Ward 1 reps that includes the downtown area, that I was in pretty constant communication with Linda McCarthy from the Downtown Partnership, and suffice to say, relative to the sandwich board signs, appreciate the work that the planning board did, and I think their work and their amendments, which are included in the motion that's been put forward, are the right landing place, and everyone's fine with that, and I appreciate that.
Further discussion? Before we call for a vote, I will add my appreciation to staff, Ms. Gress in particular. This is heavy yet tedious lifting, and I'm grateful for, again, that attention to detail. And when you have a public hearing on an item as complex and cumbersome as this one, and we don't have any takers, that's generally a sign that a lot of people have been heard as a function of process. So I'm grateful to staff and Ms. Gress for that. And without further ado, we've had a public hearing. We'll have a roll call vote.
I'm going to just note for the record that Ms. Bentley had to leave the room. And we'll do roll call on this ordinance. Cares votes yes. DeBari votes yes. Hedall votes yes. Hess votes yes. Jones votes yes. Marler votes yes. Swaney votes yes. Von Lossberg votes yes. West votes yes. Wilkins votes yes. Would any of you like to change your vote? 10 ayes and 2 absent.
And the motion is approved. We have no additional public hearings this evening. I will pass on communications from the mayor this evening, and we'll begin general comments from council members with Ms. Jones this evening.
Thanks. I just wanted to speak briefly to the Day of the Dead, since this seems to be an issue in Missoula right now, and my exposure and understanding of the Day of the Dead holiday has always been, for 12 years, my husband and I lived in Southern California, where there's a large Hispanic community, of course, and my exposure to this holiday or tradition was that it was extremely family oriented, and families would basically get together, be it at the cemetery or at a park, to remember those who had passed before them. If they went to the cemetery, they would clean the tombstone. They would always bring a picnic. There would be food, which is a very traditional. They would leave food out for the person who had passed before. It was really a way of honoring the dead. And so when we moved back to Missoula, and the first time I saw the Day of the Dead festival, I was a little bit well, it was just a new take on the whole thing, and it has more of a, although I think there are themes of remembering the dead, it also has kind of a Mardi Gras feel to the whole thing. So I can understand why there is a rub here and some tension, and certainly I'm not an expert on any of these cultural traditions, but we just kind of went on with other things the day after the Halloween. This wasn't any part that our family really took part in. So I hope that there is a continuing awareness and education and dialogue in this community regarding the Day of the Dead celebration, because I can understand why there is some tension regarding it. And I know that the School of Fine Arts at the university has done the steamroller art, and the students have studied a lot of the art forms, the native art and this kind of thing in Mexico, and then they create these amazing murals. I mean, I think there's some value in some ways that it's being approached, but I hope the dialogue continues in a far more civil fashion than what I've heard, and there's some more awareness, and hopefully this gets to a better place in our community that is celebrating the cultures and respecting the cultures. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Ms. Hedall. Ms. Marler?
I have some comments about the Festival of the Dead too, and my comments are coming as someone who's participated in the past, either as, you know, watching the procession or even as somebody who painted my face like a sugar skull, as I think a lot of people have done it. I haven't done that in a while, and maybe when I did paint my face like that, I didn't know that it was a religious ceremony or had religious significance. Maybe I didn't know that it was hurtful to people, but the fact is it doesn't matter whether I knew it was hurtful or not. Racism and hurtful behavior does not depend on having malice or malicious intent. It's just important that we continue to learn and we can do better. I feel now that I was wrong to participate in that, and I will encourage other people not to participate in that. I think we can be better, and I think that the dialogue is really helpful. I would also like to comment that in the 25 years since the festival started, it has changed. I think it used to mainly be the procession and the dressing up, and now there's a lot of workshops like write your own obituary and imagine your own death and different things. But I don't think it's changed enough yet, and I think it takes all of us to consciously think about what we're doing and how we want to participate. And to do that, we have to listen to everyone and not be defensive. It's pretty painful when you're a white liberal and someone tells you that you did something racist and hurtful. That's not something that I really like to hear about myself, but I try to listen to people and I try to believe them, even though it might be easier not to believe them. So friends, please don't participate in dress up and cultural appropriation this year, and please help spread awareness. Thanks.
Ms. Sweeney.
I wanted to start off with acknowledging the people who are suffering in Las Vegas and the families who have been impacted by what occurred in Las Vegas. I also wanted to acknowledge that we won't be having council on Monday because of Indigenous Peoples Day, so I will be celebrating with Empower Montana. They will be having their leadership luncheon, and so I'm pleased to be able to celebrate with a wonderful organization that is part of Ward 2, woohoo, Empower Montana. And then lastly, I wanted to share with you all that I will be relocating out of Missoula and returning home to North Dakota. So I will be making a transition over the next month. And I have really enjoyed my time here in Missoula, and also want to acknowledge that our beautiful city is in the traditional homelands of the Salish and Kalispel people. And so as we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, please keep that in mind. Matzagerats, thank you.
Ms. Karras.
I too was feeling compelled to talk about the Day of the Dead. The piece of content that I felt like bringing up is this right to free speech and whether we should pull permits. And it feels like a bad direction to go in when I think that the people who came and spoke have very valid arguments. But I think that that's an important part of the conversation too. And so I just wanted to say to them that I wouldn't be pursuing anything to pull a permit because I don't think that's the right direction. But I do hear them and I agree that they have valid, very valid points.
Mr. Wilkins.
So, Ruth, it's going to be sorry to see you leave. You've been an inspiration to me, and I think an inspiration to this council. And you've brought things in front of us that we need to listen to and take action on. So I really appreciate all you've done. And like I said, we'll miss you. As far as the Day of the Dead, I've never participated in that. But hearing what I heard tonight, I want to just say shame on you, Missoula, especially you people that acted out during that, shame on you. You should be sorry. I didn't think Missoula did that kind of thing. And the next thing I want to talk about is Las Vegas and all the people that lost their lives, and we're praying for you and hope people recover from that. Thank you.
Mr. Ron Losberg.
Thanks. First off, I want to say thanks to Ruth as well, and I can't put it any better than my colleague Mr. Wilkins put it. You'll be missed, and your perspective will be missed, and I appreciate your service, and good luck. I'm sorry to see that Mr. Painter's gone. He mentioned a good point about how it takes a little looking to find the good news, and I was struck because I looked like a lot of us this morning, and I couldn't find any of that good news, just a lot of horror and fear and sadness owing to the tragically unprecedented slaughter that took place in Las Vegas. This afternoon I was reading some of the personal stories of those who were murdered, and my wife Genevieve asked if I was going to say anything tonight. And I think at first I kind of had a knee-jerk reaction. I said no. And then I collected my thoughts and I asked what perhaps I should say. And then we held each other in the kitchen and she gave me some ideas. I don't have a speech tonight about background checks or mental health services or possession of guns by those with domestic violence protection orders. I supported background checks, as this community well knows, long before last night's events, and I'll support common sense efforts to curb gun violence until my last breath. But tonight we're still learning the details about what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. And I don't think we do our job well when we legislate on impulse. But tonight I'm angry, I'm scared, and most of all, I'm immeasurably sad. So if you're feeling those emotions amidst a host of possible other ones, I think it's important to just say that you're not alone. And it's, please know that. You're not alone if you're feeling that. If you're feeling those things, it's because you're a decent human being who cares, and that's a hopeful thing amidst great tragedy. So simply hug a loved one, hug a friend, call your mom, do it again tomorrow, and again after that. That was basically the gist of what Genevieve asked me to say, though she articulated it a lot better than I did. We have a thing we do with our 5-year-old daughter, Austin, where in new situations where she's a little scared or nervous, we reach for an imaginary knob above her heart that we call her brave, and we turn it up, or we ask her to turn it up. We collectively turn it up. And I think I'd end on that point, that after we have a chance to collect our breath and understand things better, get ready to turn up your brave and get active representing your values.
Mr. Hess.
My colleagues before me have said a number of touching things, and I appreciate all of you and the way that we're able to work through difficult times together. Liberty and justice for all is an aspirational statement, and Dr. Swaney works tirelessly to turn that aspiration into an enduring reality. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to get to know you a little through this last year and to work with you, and truly am inspired by what you bring to this body. I'd like to wish you all the best and thank you for your service.
Mr. Barry.
So like Mr. Hess, I want to thank Dr. Swaney for her participation, and I really do value the perspective that you've brought to council. Thank you so much for that, and I want to wish you good luck in your new position, and I also want to voice my support of your exercising your First Amendment right during the Pledge of Allegiance. I think that was brave and fitting. And a couple of other things I'd like to mention that are a little bit less, I don't know what the right word is, but maybe a little bit on a different note. Mr. Giordano, of all people, today suggested that we were granting an exemption to our Complete Streets ordinance, and I would like to take an exception to that. We were not granting an exception to our Complete Streets ordinance. We were implementing it in a slightly different way than could have been implemented. And I just want to draw attention to the fact that there are a number of different approaches that one can take in order to meet the objectives that we have regarding addressing vehicular and bicycle and pedestrian traffic along our rights of way. And I think it was a good thing to do to listen to the neighborhood. But we are doing our best to ensure that all modes of transportation are being taken into account along Linda Vista, and we will do that on every street in our community. And then lastly, I would also like to suggest that the efforts that were put forth last week or the week before, I can't remember exactly when, addressing the city cemetery, that the city is not taking away jobs from the public sector, and in fact, the cemetery provides jobs. I'm sorry, not taking away jobs from the private sector, but the cemetery provides jobs to the private sector. The citizens of Missoula support the cemetery to the tune of over $650,000 a year, and if it wasn't for that support to the city cemetery, there wouldn't be those jobs in the community. So I would argue that the citizens of Missoula are underwriting the opportunity for a variety of businesses to participate and contribute to the community, and I think we should be looking at it that way rather than thinking that we're taking something away from people.
Ms. West.
So I think I'll just echo what everyone else said. Today's kind of a heavy day all around, but I will definitely miss Ruth. That was a sad phone call to get. I very much appreciated, even before she was a member on council, her eloquence and composure when speaking about really hard subjects, and being such a good voice among us. So I will miss that, and I wish her luck, and I'm sure she'll do amazing things elsewhere.
We have no committee reports this evening. We have no items of new business. Are there any additional items to be referred? Seeing none of those. Any miscellaneous communications, petitions, reports, or announcements? Seeing none of those, as always, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your service. We will be adjourned.